Welcome everyone, Christine here with my campaign analysis of Queek Headtaker in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Another legendary lord focused on the so-called race for Karak 8 Peaks. Though unlike, say, Belegar or Skarsnik, the downsides of Queek not controlling Karak 8 Peaks are relatively minor in comparison. They're pretty substantial for both Belegar and Skarsnik, not being able to recruit orcs if you're playing Skarsnik, or having a 50% upkeep increase if you're playing as Belegar. Whereas for Queek, you only have a -2 control in all provinces. Now, that does mean you will face more rebellions, but rebellions are not necessarily a downside, because they're free money, free experience in a lot of ways. Of course, you do want to take Karak 8 Peaks relatively quickly in any of the campaigns that deal with it, because there's generally going to be some fairly substantial benefits due to a unique structure that these legendary lords can construct over there. But regardless, before we get into the subject of Karak 8 Peaks, let's talk about Queek's strategic situation and the things that he has to deal with. He starts at war with Gorfang Rutgut over here, who is very close to him. He has 2 provincial capitals, and he does have 2 armies. So he has 2 tier 2 settlements that he starts with, as well as a tier 1 settlement. All of these settlements also have barracks in them. So that can be a bit of an issue to contend with, because you know that Rutgut is always going to recruit certain units against you. He's always going to recruit a good amount of orcs, especially since they've changed the greenskin. So now he has access to things like black orcs, big guns, fairly early on in his campaign. But really, Rutgut is not necessarily that big of a problem. The bigger issue in this campaign from a strategic standpoint is what's going on to the south of you, and also to the west of you. So you've got Malagor the Dark Omen, who may or may not declare war on you. You've got Skarbrand to the southwest. Skarbrand is fairly chill with regards to Quake, so he shouldn't really be that much of an issue, especially because you can get a non-aggression pact very early on in this campaign. So that's not a problem, but the real issue comes in from Thorek Ironbrow. So Thorek is a very dangerous legendary lord, and he will always march in the same way in his campaign. He is always going to take this entire province in the southern World Edge Mountains. Then he's going to take the Devil's Backbone, and then he's likely to march on Lamia. Once Lamia is dealt with, he is likely going to declare war on you, assuming he doesn't get involved in a long war with Khalida and potentially Krokkar, because that is another factor to take into consideration here. But that means your initial settlement over here in Misty Mountain is exposed. It does have a pretty good landmark over here that you want to keep control of, but you are in a situation where your campaign objectives do require you to head north, but your biggest threat is actually from the south. So the Clan Moor's headquarters, they give you chieftain recruitment capacity, recruitment rank for clan rat units, recruitment cost for Skaven slaves and clan rats in the region, food, and growth, as well as a hefty amount of pure income. This is very useful, because combined with the gem cutter workshop that you do have in Karak Asgal, it means you can generate a good amount of pure income as the Skaven, as opposed to relying on building modifiers, which you still have as Skaven. But that means you do have to somehow contend with the issue of Thorek. And you don't have to rush for Karak 8 Peaks as soon as this campaign starts. You do want to deal with Rutgut, to be sure, and maybe Karak Azul. But rushing for Karak 8 Peaks may not necessarily be the biggest priority from the beginning of your campaign. Because yes, there are certainly benefits, but given the way Skaven settlement occupation works, it might just be worth it in this particular campaign to wait a while before you go for it. That way, when you do show up at Karak 8 Peaks, you could potentially take it as a tier 5 settlement instantly, as opposed to not having enough food to do so, or ending up in a position where you might have enough food, but you don't have enough money and you don't want to pay the food penalty. So just Zerg rushing Karak 8 peaks may not necessarily be the best strategy. Besides, there is a pretty powerful army over here in Karak 8 peaks that will be a bit tricky to deal with. You can certainly win a siege. You do have a lot of heroes you can get early on. You can get artillery, you can get engineers. My favorite strategy, because of Skaven occupation, I prefer taking Karak as Gaul as a tier 3 settlement, and then when I do take it as a tier 3 settlement, I just want to get Plague Claw catapults, a Warlock Engineer, and get myself access to a whole bunch of units, range units and melee units available in this campaign. Things like Warp Grinders, Flamethrowers, Railing Gunners. You can get access to those fairly quickly in this campaign. And because of the financial dynamic that you do have available for you when you are playing a Queek campaign, due to the various resource buildings, you can actually end up in a position where you do have the money for it. Heck, you might even avoid taking Karak Azul as quickly as possible, instead march on the Crook Fort, select the Karak Azul, get a ton of money, get a bunch of food, and then with that food, maybe even get Karak Azul as a tier 4 settlement, which means, yes, you get things like Jezzails, you get hero capacity, you get all kinds of powerful units and heroes available in this campaign. And that is one of the key elements, I would say, in Queek's campaign: flexibility. See, Frot and Ikeclaw, they have very powerful units, but their starting dynamic is limiting. They can become more powerful, far more powerful than Queek can, but having that kind of flexibility from the beginning, have a good starting province, having a lot of money, having relatively easy enemies to deal with very early on in a campaign, does give you a huge amount of power. After that, sure, in the long term, you might end up behind other factions, but that early game dynamic really favors Queek, far more so than pretty much every other Skaven Legendary Lord. Snitch is a bit of an exception, but then you gotta consider Geld, Xiao Ming, Miao Ying. Dealing with Thorek can be annoying, but dealing with Cafe and Geld can be even more frustrating, especially when you consider the fact that Snitch may also have to deal with Lokir because everyone hates the freaking Skaven in a campaign. Actually, as the Skaven, one of the things worth pointing out is having a trading partner, or a couple of trading partners, or having a couple of factions that you can get along with very early on in your campaign is a substantial benefit, because because having trading partners is going to be exceptionally useful. So you have good ways of earning money early on, and you might have the diplomatic flexibility to make trading worth it. That would be one perspective to be had on the subject of Queek. You do have 2 hero capacity for chieftains, upkeep benefits for Stormvermin and Clan Rats, and you can use up to 5 additional levels of Menace Bellows. You can summon Clan Rats in battle, more Clan Rats in battle for that, and you can do so cheaper because you can reduce the food cost for additional uses of Menace from Below. In terms of its Lord effects and special skill line, you reduce the leadership for enemy lords and embedded heroes in a region. You get a melee attack benefit when fighting greenskins and dwarves for his entire army, weapon strength, and then ability uses for Menace from Below. Special skill line wise, you do lose 1 loyalty for new recruits, so no lords, but you do gain 8 leadership for your entire army. More importantly, you do get more leadership for Quake, Frenzy for Quake, plus 2 loyalty for Warlord recruits, so that's obviously countering it, but you lose 2 loyalty for Great Seer recruits. You do cause fear, you have a better character leadership aura, you have life is very cheap for recruit rank for Skaven Slaves and Clan Rats, armor for Skaven Slaves and Clan Rats. Now, Clan Rats aren't really the best units in a campaign, but when you start thinking about all of these benefits combined that Quake does have, things get pretty damn powerful. On top of that, you also have a recruit rank and local recruitment duration of -1 turn for Stormvermin units. One of the problems with Stormvermin is that they take multiple turns to recruit. Well, not for Quake, they don't. And so you are in a kind of situation, if you are playing as Quake, where you can get Stormvermin stacks far more easily than other people can. Like if we look at a regular Warlord over here and the kind of benefits that they provide, they're not going to compare to the kind of benefits that obviously Queek does have. So Queek in a way, and in a way I would argue is better than Tretch, who is also focused on Stormvermin. Queek in a way is really effective with regards to making Stormvermin stacks, at least quickly. Like that's one of the principal advantages of Queek's campaign. It's not about having the most amount of power, but it's being able to maximize your benefits quickly. And if anyone's played Warhammer 3 at the high level, then you understand that being able to speed through things is actually a strength in of itself. It's actually the most substantial strength that you can have in a campaign. Using console commands to give myself control of Karak 8 peaks. Keep in mind you do start with an undercity there, though I probably get rid of the structures just to get myself even more money. That's a pretty substantial benefit, the sheer amount of money you can get early on in this campaign. But with control of Karak 8 peaks, you do have a loyalty benefit, a Lord recruit rank benefit, as well as frenzy for clan rats and Stormvermin units. So you can recruit higher ranked clan rats and Stormvermin, faster Stormvermin, and ones with frenzy. I would dare say that the benefit here, in a lot of ways, is actually far more substantial than what Tretch is able to provide. At least early on. Again, it is that dynamic of like, Queek is really, really good early on in a campaign. He dominates from that perspective. Because later on, sure, with very high-ranked Stormvermin and Clan Rats, things do start changing around quite a bit in that respect. But that's not the only benefit of Karak 8 peaks. There's actually two other benefits that you do have in Karak 8 peaks. Now, you do have the Pillar City Hub, so that's something everyone has access to, so it's not special over there. But it is an income, it is a growth benefit, food benefit. But importantly, you do have the Plundered Dwarven Treasury Chain. This gives you income, diplomatic relations, upkeep for clan rats, vermin, gutter runners, night runners, weapon teams as well, and a 15% income from sacking and looting settlements. And on top of that, it also reduces the corruption in the province. Now, the sacking and looting benefit is very substantial for Skaven, because every time you interact with the settlement, unless you're building an under empire, but every time you're dealing with the settlement, you either loot and occupy it, or you're sacking it. So having an extra sacking and looting benefit does mean you're getting even more money in this specific campaign. That is one benefit from that. But then you also have the Skaven corruption benefit. See, Skaven corruption is not actually an upside. You lose control from it. You can manage it. You do have the bell building chain and all that kind of stuff. But if you could maintain a low level of Skaven corruption, that would actually be, typically speaking, a really fantastic thing in a Skaven campaign. Because high level of Skaven corruption causes control issues, whereas a low level of Skaven corruption grants you substantial benefits. So for instance, over here, because I use the console command, there's no Skaven corruption, and I'm getting 5 control and free food. So having lower Skaven corruption, or at least manageable, you don't even need to have it, 0. Just, if you look at 40 over here for Skaven Blight, if you can control it to some extent, then that would, typically speaking, be a really, really good benefit over there. It is probably mission impossible, but it is a tangible benefit to talk about over there. And then finally, you have the meat, the slaughter factor over here. This is growth, food, casualty replenishment, and a further corruption benefit here. So you're looking at -2 corruption from the meat, and you're looking at -3, so you're looking at -5 corruption that you can work with over here. And then you can also use efficient planning to further reduce corruption even further. So Karak 8 peaks, at the very least, can be in a positive corruption situation where you're not dealing with the negatives of the Skaven corruption, or at least not as much. Chances are there will still be some level of Skaven corruption that's just simply put unavoidable, because every building you have adds some level of Skaven corruption, to be sure, but it can be managed to some extent, at the very least, in this province. So Queek ends up with more money, more food, and swarms of Stormvermin clan rats that you can use. Beyond the ability to use all kinds of different units in his campaign. Because he has a Stormvermin clan rat benefit, but he doesn't, there's nothing preventing him from getting all kinds of units. And one of the things worth pointing out about Queek's situation, like, Ikaclaw has a really powerful range capability, but he's lacking in terms of melee capability. Well, Queek may not, obviously doesn't have anywhere near the range capability that someone like Ikaclaw has, but he does have good line holders, so that means his range units can do their jobs without the same level of stress. Whereas Ikaclaw is all about building a glass cannon army that, well, with a lot of cannon, and maybe not as much glass as you might think. Queek is more about a balanced playstyle. And I guess that is probably very appropriate for Clan Wars, because their whole specialty in the Warhammer lore is really the fact that they actually handle the military aspect in as much of a professional way as the Skaven can handle a military. So their troops are relatively loyal, they're well trained, they're well handled, so you do end up having a great amount of variety that you can work with in this campaign, and a good amount of flexibility in this campaign as well. On top of having a starting position that isn't complete misery in the same way that, say, Ikaclaw or Fraught have to contend with. I guess we'll see how things do shape out for Fraught after the Kislev rework. It might go very badly, it might go very well. But that's all I had to say. Christine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications.